Although I know that many of you have known Zev Yaroslavsky for many years, some personally and some just as a major cultural figure in our city, I'm nonetheless going to read just some of his accomplishments. During a career in public life that spans 4 decades, he's been at the forefront of LA's biggest issues: transportation, the environment, healthcare, cultural arts. He was first elected to office in 1975. He was 26 years old when he won the Los Angeles City Council's coveted 5th district seat. In 94, he was elected to the 5-member Board of Supervisors representing the 3rd district, the western part of the county, and a constituency of 2 million people. Term limits forced his retirement in 2014, but on the Board of Supervisors, he became a leader in fiscal, healthcare, transportation, cultural, environmental matters. The county's leader in the cultural arts, he championed efforts to rebuild and modernize the Hollywood Bowl, instrumental in the developing of Walt Disney Concert Hall. He also funded major investments in LA County Museum of Art, the Museum of Natural History, and the San Fernando Valley Performing Arts Center. He's long been associated with the National Democratic Institute and is now the director of the LA Initiative at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs and the Department of History, focusing on the intersection of policy, politics, and history of the LA region. His best-selling memoir, which I know some of you have read because you've talked to me about it, Zev's Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power, was published in 2023. Born and raised in Los Angeles, he earned his BA and MA degrees from UCLA, where he now teaches and runs the Institute. And that doesn't actually cover it. He's also been, of course, a major figure in the Jewish community as a Jewish leader, and started that even before 1975, when he was one of the leading figures in the student struggle about Soviet Jewry. And that was an important chapter in his life and a chapter in his book. So I think maybe I want to start with your upbringing. What is it that brought you to such a life?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I had to think about whether I wanted to do this because honestly, I'm not intimidated by many people, but being in a conversation with you, I was very intimidated. Could I rise to the occasion? But I listened to your advice to the teens, and I didn't realize that I shouldn't think like that I know everything. So I may take you up on that in your conversations and just pass on some questions. I think about this as, I've always thought about it. My life didn't start when I was born. It wasn't start when my parents conceived me. I look back at my ancestors, and the one ancestor that I focus on is my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Shimon Soloveitchik. So I'm a Soloveitchik. He was born in a little hamlet, which was then in Lithuania, today is in Belarus. I went to his hamlet to see, I wanted to walk in his footsteps. He was a Renaissance man, Jewish Renaissance man. He was a labor Zionist. He was a delegate to the 1905, 07, 09, and 11 Zionist Congresses in Basel, Switzerland. Anyway, I won't go through the whole thing. It's an entire chapter in my book. He's a fascinating human being who probably had as much influence on me because he dedicated his life to things that were bigger than himself. And the dream of resurrecting, I hate to use that word in the context of Israel, but resurrecting the Jewish state, a dream he had, and he never was able to realize because he died in 1940, 8 years before I was born. Thanks to his writings, many writings, I understand his passion, and I wish I was asked in an interview on Channel 4, who's the one person you'd like to meet if you could meet them? And Aristotle, Socrates. No, I would like to have met Shimon Soloveitchik because it would have really been a thrill. That's really where my DNA starts, at least as far as I know. My parents were labor Zionists too. My mother and father founded the Habonim Labor Zionist Youth Movement in the early 1930s, and they were Hebrew teachers. They had no money. My dad bought his first and only house in 1956 when he was 54 years old. He paid $15,000 for the house on Martell and Melrose. He sold it 15 years later for $21,500. And he thought he had died and gone to heaven. He made $6,500. 5 years later, it sold for $225,000. So what was the most valuable thing in our house? The most valuable thing in our house were our friends and our books. And he used to think, if there's a fire in the house, what are the things we were going to be the first things to take? He didn't have a deed when we lived in Boyle Heights. It's the books that he treasured. Hebrew, Yiddish, even a few English books. And they raised me and my sister in not in a lecturing sort of way, but by example. And we had discussions around the Shabbat dinner table all the time. I mean, my sister and I both had our parents for teachers. Not a thing I would recommend, to have your parents as a teacher in a classroom. I watched what they did, and I watched how they behaved and how they dedicated themselves to issues that were bigger than themselves. And that's who I became. And so when I became old enough to do something on my own, as a teenager, actually, the Soviet Jewry movement, I was a member of the Habonim Labor Zionist Youth Organization here in LA. I decided to take this issue on. And why did I take that issue on? I had a grandmother who came here with Soloveitchik. He was Soloveitchik's wife. But she was about half his age when they got married. I won't say it in the synagogue. My sister and I have a theory about how my mother was born and all that stuff. But she had when they came here to the United States, she didn't want to come because she had a lover in the old country, in Poltava, in Ukraine.
So that you'll say in the synagogue. By Giovanni.
I guess you can fill out the rest of it. But she, when she went, so she made a deal with my grandfather, that she would go with her husband to come here to New York, settle him and my 13-year-old mother-to-be, and then she went back to her lover in Poltava and lived with him for the rest of his life. They moved to Leningrad before the war, survived the siege of Leningrad. She was a nurse. And my father had two sisters that lived in Kharkov, now Kharkiv, in Ukraine. When I had my bar mitzvah, we were getting telegrams from all of my parents' friends from all over the place, from New York, from Israel, and from Russia. And I got a telegram from my aunts. It said, "Congratulations on your 13th birthday." And I read it, I took note of it. I said to my father, my mother passed away when I was 10, so my father was a widower. And I said, what's with happy birthday? Every other one says Mazel Tov on your bar mitzvah, congratulations on your bar mitzvah, Mazel Tov, this and that. I said, what's with happy birthday? He said, if they had said bar mitzvah or Mazel Tov in the telegram, first of all, the telegram probably wouldn't have gotten sent. And secondly, there might have been consequences for them, a knock on the door from a KGB man, whatever. That got my attention. I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, that saying Mazel Tov on your bar mitzvah could land you in Siberia. And I got it at the age of 13, this motivated me. And when I got to be 16, 17, I started writing articles for the Habonim newsletter and Soviet Jewry. And then I started, when I got to UCLA, organizing demonstrations on behalf of Soviet Jews, and became a pretty, for a kid who was a college student, a pretty important figure in the constellation of Jewish activists around the world. That's what got me into this. And remember, this was the 1960s, late 60s, civil rights, Vietnam War, social action was the currency of the day, and that's what I cared about. And I want to tell you a story because it relates to my public service career, if we get to it. When I teach my students at UCLA, especially graduate students in public policy, I tell them what the great Rabbi John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach, had a great line. I got to know him. One of the great privileges of being in a public figure is you get to know some people that you otherwise wouldn't know. And we became friends. He had a line that said, your reputation is what other people think of you. Integrity is who you really are. And one of the things that I learned by osmosis from my parents and from my community is to be, to have integrity. And I don't mean in a pecuniary way, but, that you lead your life in not only a meaningful way, but one with integrity. And the other thing I tell my students is, freedom. Freedom is a word that everybody can define for themselves. But for me, the word freedom got crystallized in Red Square when my aunt, my father's older sister, met me in Moscow on my first trip to the Soviet Union in 1968. I was 19 years old. And we're standing in the middle of Red Square, and I'm already an activist in Soviet Jewry stuff. And in the middle of Red Square, I said, so Rosa, I said, what's it like for Jews here in the Soviet Union? She said, shh, the walls have ears. I said, what walls? They're 100 yards away. And it struck me that the paranoia, that you can't even talk in the middle of Red Square. In the days when we went to the Soviet Union, I was there several times bringing books and Sidurim and all that you communicated with people on the old magic slates. You all remember the magic slate? You write something on it, and then you you lift the cellophane and it erases what you wrote. That's the way we communicated on sensitive subjects in my aunt's apartment in Kharkov. That moment in Red Square in August, September of 1968 crystallized my views about a lot of things, including police spying here in LA and the FBI and some of the things that were going on. That personal freedom of speech, even if you don't agree with the speech, which can sometimes be a problem even within our own community. The old line is that you fight hate speech with more speech. Speech is the most important thing, and I think we're starting to see in our country how speech has been curtailed, has been constrained in many ways. The news media is being co-opted one by one. That for me is a red line in our society, and for me as a public official. It all started with my grandfather, with my Aunt Rosa, my grandmother, who I tried to get I never met her. My sister did. My sister's older than I am. She visited the Soviet Union in 1961 on her way to Israel when she was making Aliyah. And it's a very touching story. First thing my grandmother said to her granddaughter was, "Did your mother ever forgive me?" And I said, so when my sister told me the story, when I was writing my book, we interviewed my sister. It's the longest conversation I ever had with my sister. And I said, well, what did she say? What did you say to her when she asked you that question? And she says, well, I didn't want to lie to her, but I said, we never really talked about it much. Of course, they did talk about it a lot. My mother and my sister, because she was a teenager, died when my sister was 18. So my sister got to know my mother in a way that a young adult would get to know her. I knew her only as a nine-year-old. And so a lot of what I know about my mother, I know from my sister. And that I can envision this. My grandmother died in '64, so my first trip to the Soviet Union was '68, so I never got to meet my grandmother. I'm obsessed with this whole story about Soloveitchik, who was 34 when she was 17 when they got married. And then I'll stop with this story. I'll tell you the story about Soloveitchik that I love. He wrote a letter back to the old country when he was in New York. He was a teacher. He ran a cheder in Poltava, and he came here and he taught Talmud and Mishnah and all this stuff in New York to 8-year-olds. If you remember Hebrew school when you were 8, you know how tough they can be. An all-boys school. And he writes a letter back in 1927 to one of his friends in Poltava. And he says, I think I made a mistake in coming here. You know, it's terrible. You know, these boys, they misbehave. They're hooligans. They throw things at each other in class. And goes through, in this environment, I'm expected to teach Talmud and Torah. And then he says, the only thing they seem to care about is this game called baseball. And I'm saying 1927 in New York, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Torah and Talmud or baseball, which is it going to be? And I related to that. Poor Shimon Soloveitchik. I would have been his worst nightmare in his class.
It's good to know that things don't change that much.
That's right.
In terms of, so that is a wonderful and such a rich history, and I'm sure that there is much more to explore there, but one of the things that I just want to take from it is that it seems to me clear then why you were driven into the kind of public service that you were, from the concerns that you had from your family history. But why did you fall in love with Los Angeles early? Like, did you love the city that you were in because you've given your life to this city?
It's an interesting question. I never thought about it because I was born here, right? It's like my kids. They were born into my life, right? Like Prince Charles, he was born into the monarchy. He knew no other life. I knew no other place. It's not like I came from New York and I missed the snowstorms. But when I first ran for office, the reason I ran for the city council was, first of all, a lot of people encouraged me to do that because there was a vacancy. Ed Edelman, my predecessor, had been elected to the Board of Supervisors. And you should run. You should think about running. And the notion that I could run and win was a fantasy with a capital F. It was just impossible. I had no money. I didn't know anybody with money to run a campaign, but I had worked in politics and I had been a social activist. So I decided, Barbara and I talked about it, and she says, look, we have no kids. We've got some money saved up. These were days when you could save money. I was running the Council for Soviet Jews, and I taught confirmation in Hebrew schools in Pasadena at Stephen Wise, all over the place, and it paid pretty well for the number of hours that they did. By the way, I thank my father for that. He founded the Hebrew Teachers Union in LA in the early 40s, in the mid 40s. And so I ran, and the reason I ran was I wanted to be in politics. My real ambition was to be in Washington, because international affairs, national affairs, Israel, these were issues that kept me up at night, and maybe this would be a stepping stone to Congress. And then I became a city councilman. And remember, I was 26 years old when I really didn't have a long life and a broad spectrum of experience. I knew how to organize demonstrations. I was a history student. I was an economics major in college. But I really didn't have life experience. And the city gave me that experience. Finance, policies, law enforcement, land use, all the things that is involved in the city. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with being in a position where I could actually have an influence on the community in which I lived. And I saw things that were great, and I saw things that could be improved. And most importantly, and I didn't think about it at the time, but I have time now to reflect, is I had the opportunity to help people. I mean, to just solve problems for people. A lot of people in politics today, and you're going to get to the future of LA. My problem with politics today is that it's become a profession. In the LA City Council, where my daughter-in-law serves on the city council, she's a terrific person. She's had a life experience professionally other than government before she became a councilwoman. But the overwhelming majority of members of the city council in Los Angeles, and I don't say this as a criticism of any of the members of the council, it's just a reality. Most of them their whole life experience has been working for a politician or being a politician. They never did anything else. And I, with 26, I'd been to the Soviet Union 3 times. I'd been to Israel multiple times. I've been to Washington. I lobbied for the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. I had another life other than being an aide to a city councilman or to a state legislator. That's a problem. When I became a councilman, I was I think at the time, the 3rd youngest councilman ever elected. Roz Wyman was 22. She represented this district. And I forgot who the other one was, but I was 26. There were several members of the city council who were old enough to be my grandfather. And yet, I had the same vote as they did. Everybody had a vote. And I have to say, one of the great surprises in my life is that they treated me like an equal and not in this, top-down, pedantic kind of way. We know better than you, They let me make my mistakes and learn from them, and I fell in love with municipal government. It's hard to believe this, but so I decided. And by the way, I had no chance of going to Congress here. Henry Waxman was my congressman. He's a legend. Howard Berman, a legend. These were Mel Levine. These were all great people, and so I embraced it. And then when Ed Edelman retired from the Board of Supervisors in 1994, I decided to run for that because that is the second best local government job in America after mayor of New York. Because every issue that affects society crosses the desk of a county supervisor from A to Z, and you mentioned them in your introduction. And so I've been very happy with, people say, there's this question that people always ask me, do you have any regrets? And that's a code question for, are you sorry you didn't run for mayor in 1989, which I was preparing to do, but then decided not to because I was going to get killed by Tom Bradley, so I didn't want to give up my job. And I don't have any regrets. I don't have any regrets about that decision. It was the right decision to make at that time. And then the life that I had as a county supervisor was, think about all the things that we did and the challenges that we had. We almost went bankrupt. The day I was sworn in on December, I think, 4th or 5th of 1994, Orange County that afternoon declared bankruptcy. And we were on the verge of bankruptcy for reasons that were different than Orange County's, and we had to rescue take the county back it off the precipice of bankruptcy. And because of my schooling at the city council, I chaired the finance committee for 11 years. I became kind of the linchpin of the 3 Democrats on the Board of Supervisors at the time. We were 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. It was the 3 Democrats who were the fiscal conservatives. It was the 2 Republicans who wanted to spend. And it was the reason we were almost bankrupt is because there was a time when the 3 conservatives actually mortgaged the future of the county, and we were able to save the county. It became it's not a direct answer to your question. Do I love Los Angeles? Of course I do. This is my hometown. I drive through the city. I drive through the county. Every place I go, just like every place you go, there's something about that place that you remember. This is where I took Barbara on our first date. This is where I had my first race at Fairfax High School, at Westchester High School in a track meet. And that building, I had something to do with. The Hollywood Bowl, when I go to the Hollywood Bowl, we spent $60 million to take that place from a 1950s facility and turn it into a 21st century facility, so it'll last for a long time. These are things that I take great pride in. Just the other day, on Thursday morning, it was the 25th anniversary of a self-help legal clinic that we funded. It wasn't my idea, but they convinced me to fund it at the county. 2 million people, mostly poor people and people of color, who couldn't afford a lawyer, who didn't have enough money in their savings account, if they had a savings account, to pay for 1 hour of a lawyer's fee. They created this program, we created this program, where a person could go into court, and the justice system, the judiciary, collaborated with us on this, with the assistance of a nonprofit lawyer who would stand next to them and make the case to the judge themselves on things like landlord-tenant issues, domestic violence issues, not felonies, but things like that, civil cases. And 2 million people have benefited from that. And I didn't know that it had been 2 million. When I left, it was a fraction of that. That's a huge footprint of success. And so I love the city. I think the city has a lot of problems. I think the governance structure has a lot of problems. I think the quality of, and again, not mentioning any names of any people in particular, this goes over the last 25, 30 years, the quality of the people who serve in government today, the influence that special interests, both on the left and on the right, both in business and labor, have on the decisions that are made is a real problem. And it's in Washington, it's a problem. In Sacramento, it's a horrible problem. I would never go to Sacramento unless I absolutely had to. It made me sick. I think the play, what's it called, The Little Whorehouse in Texas, was about the legislature in Texas. This is almost on that level. That's a concern that I have. When I was in the first term and a half at the city, real estate inflation, there are probably a few people here who are in real estate and are landlords. Rents were going up at an exponential rate, and I don't use that loosely, exponential rate. There were people whose rents were increasing 3 times in 1 year. And just like my dad's house went from $21,500 to $225,000 in 5 years in value, so did apartment buildings go up in value. And inflation was, all of you here probably remember, the inflation rate was 17.5% in 1979. It's the reason Jimmy Carter lost his election in 1980. We passed a rent control law in the city of Los Angeles. It was a relatively modest rent control law compared to what Santa Monica had and what West Hollywood has. But we had 5 Republicans on the city council in 1978 and 3 Democrats who voted like Republicans. And yet we were able to come together on, with compromise, with give and take to get to goal. And that's hard to do these days. And a democracy has to, like you said in your message today, you have to listen to what the other side says and see if there's a meeting of the minds. I have an old axiom I have a lot of axioms that I've coined for myself. One of my axioms is it's better to negotiate with a strong adversary than a weak one, because a strong adversary can always get to yes. A weak one can never get to yes. And this came about after an MTA strike, the bus strike in 2003. We had a union leader at the time who couldn't make a deal with us because he was afraid that his members would toss him out as president of the union. And then there were other unions, the head of the union of the sheriff's union, who they wanted something we couldn't give them. We offered them an alternative. He talked to his people. He said, we could live with that. And we made the deal like that and avoided a strike and avoided a whole thing. Those are the kinds of, you're looking for people who are comfortable in their own skin and who themselves don't just look at their own self-interest, although self-interest is a main driver, but who also see the bigger picture.
So reflect on, I think every city in America, every major city has changed enormously. None more than Los Angeles. I mean, the Los Angeles you were born into is such a different city from the Los Angeles. Are you, understanding the difficulties, first of all, what do you think are the major changes in the city? You don't have to go through all of them, but 1 or 2. And are you bullish, bearish on Los Angeles's near-term future?
So, this is one of those questions where I would say I'll take Rabbi Wolpe's advice. I don't know the answer to this one, but I'm a politician, so I'll give you the answer
anyway. Right.
The city has changed dramatically. When I was growing up, the city was 85% Anglo. Today, Anglos are about 25% of the city. Latinos, of course, are the single biggest demographic, but they're less than 50%, about 45%. I may be off by a few points. Asian Pacific Islanders are growing at a very fast rate. It's a very diverse city, and that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. That's what the world is like, and in a way, Los Angeles has become a little sample of what the world is. And maybe if we can learn to live together in a constructive way, which is still a work in progress and will be forever a work in progress, maybe the rest of the world can do it. So it's kind of that's one change. The second change is that, well, the economy has changed. Our national economy has changed. The economic polarization, the economic disparities between haves and have-nots in the city is the biggest threat, not only to the city, but to the country. And between the Hudson River and the Colorado River, there's a whole country out there that doesn't have anything in common with the East and West Coast. I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine, a mentor of mine, Lou Rosenblum, who was a NASA space scientist, who founded the Cleveland Council on Soviet Anti-Semitism. He's the guy that got me into the Soviet Jewry business in an intellectual way. And Barbara and I spent Yom Kippur at their home in Cleveland once. He passed away a few years ago, and his daughter asked me to come speak at his memorial service, which I did. And I got to Cleveland, and I looked at, I took my iPhone out. I was waiting for her to meet me at the lobby at the hotel. And I thought, I wonder what Lou's house is worth today. And I remember his address, and I typed it into Zillow. He had a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, small, relatively modest, kind of like Lakewood, one of the Lakewood houses. And I looked at it, and it said it's worth $175,000. And I was stunned. That house in Lakewood would be worth $1.2 million, at the time maybe $900,000. And for the first time, I viscerally understood why a guy who was a NASA space scientist who helped invent the photovoltaic cell that powered the Apollo to the moon had a house that his wealth, which was largely tied up in his house, was a fraction of what mine was, because I happen to live in the west side of Los Angeles. And by the way, when his daughter showed up, I said, Miriam, I looked up your dad and mom's house. I was shocked. It's worth $175,000 on Zillow. She says, you're kidding. I said, are you surprised? She says, yeah, because he sold it 5 years ago for $125,000. This is the disparity, the economic disparity is the problem. So we talk about the price of real estate. Well, the price of real estate is out of sight for most people. People can't buy. I could not buy a house today like I did in 1976. It's because the prices are too high, and it's because the salaries are too low. And when you have people who are making, we're in the field now. I do a survey at UCLA, a countywide quality of life survey. One of the questions we're asking this year is, if you had an emergency, a financial emergency that required you to come up with $1,000 immediately, would you be able to do it? I know what the answer is going to be. There's going to be a whole lot of people who don't have $1,000 in their savings account, if they have a bank account. This is the problem that I see in LA. I don't know what the answer to it is, and especially the way the national government is going now, cutting services, cutting health services, is just an anathema to me. I spent 20 years at the county. The biggest issue that the county has is healthcare delivery at the time I became a supervisor, 10 million people lived in the county, 2.5 million had no health insurance, zero. We were the safety net. We were the provider of last resort. And how did we provide it? We got a lot of money from the federal government. From the Great Society on, this was a big deal. I spent a lot of time in Washington fighting to keep those dollars flowing, and we were successful. in doing so. Now those monies are being cut. And so, and I know it for people who I know, without getting specific, who all of a sudden have no health insurance, even after Obamacare has been cut, is being cut. And it's the real effect is going to be right after the election. These guys aren't stupid. They didn't do it before the election. The impact, they voted for it last year. The impact is going to be in January of 2027. And that's that. So in LA, this is ground zero for this issue. This is where the disparity of the economic disparities are broader, are bigger because we have a big population, and more polarized than in any other part of the country. And I worry about that. And that, to me, that's the biggest issue we have. And when people have nothing, we can watch the news right now and see when people have nothing, they have nothing to lose. Was it that Janis Joplin line? That exactly. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Yeah.
So I'm going to open it in a second if people have questions for a couple minutes. But I want to ask you, as I told you before, one personal question. Not that these haven't been personal, but more personal, which is, as many people here know, as I certainly know, you were married to an absolutely extraordinary woman. And I always thought, like at every Jewish event, the most fun thing you could do was talk to Barbara. And I just want to know if you want to share a reminiscence or two about her.
Yeah, you have a couple of hours. Look, I got lucky when I met Barbara. Barbara was a member of the Emeritus Labor Zionist Youth Group. I was in Habonim. Hashomer was the movement that my parents broke off from in the 30s because they were too far to the left. So we were rivals, kind of. I knew her then, but I didn't really know her. And then I was a shomer, a gopher for the LA Hebrew High School when it met on Sunday mornings at the old University of Judaism campus on Sunset. And she was the switchboard operator on Sunday morning. And I asked one girl who was there, a young woman who was there, if she would want to go out on a date. Now, I'd never had a girlfriend. I really didn't go out on dates, but I was going to try this out. And she said no, she was busy. So I turned to Barbara, who was sitting at the switchboard office. I said, so, what are you doing Saturday night? And that was the last date I ever had with anybody. And I say I was lucky. She was a magnificent human being. I would say if we had sainthood in the Jewish religion, I'd put her name in for that. She, to a fault, she was sacrificial in the sense that she would do anything to help somebody else, even if it was fundamentally contrary to her, created an existential threat to her. She would always be out there for somebody else. And she was very smart and loved people. That's the thing that I never understood about her, because I mean, this guy's a jerk. Why are you talking to him? Oh, he's got a good side to him. I write about her in my book. The two-page dedication to her, which is the greatest piece of literature I've ever written, and I didn't edit it except for a couple of punctuation marks. It just flowed from me. She was my career would not have been anything but for her. She was not the woman behind the man. She was the woman in front of the man. She was on my side. I said at her funeral, I said that, and by the way, the funeral was on December 30th. the eve before New Year's Eve. People are on vacation. We arrived at the synagogue at Temple Israel on Hollywood about a half an hour before the scheduled time of the funeral. There was a traffic jam for blocks away. There were 1,100 people came to her funeral. And I say that because, and I said it there, I said, all of you are here because you loved her, not because of me. I said, and the reason I survived 10 elections is because you voted for me, not because you agreed with me or loved me, but you didn't want Barbara to be married to an unemployed politician. And it got a big laugh, because it's true. She was a people person. When she walked into a room, the room came to her. And I mean, it was, and the way she passed was a blessing and a curse. I mean, the curse, obviously, that she passed away. The blessing was how our family came together during this absurd West Nile virus. Is what, we were both bitten up by mosquitoes in our home. And she drew the short straw, or the mosquito that was infected with West Nile. The odds of this happening to somebody is 1 in a million, maybe 1 in 10 million. And I've become an expert on mosquito-borne diseases, as you can imagine. But it was a roller coaster for us. And I know Anna is here, Anna Tenenblatt. She and Bill were with us at the hospital. I mean, we just, the friendships that we've had came back tenfold when we really needed support. And my daughter and my son both eulogized her, and they both, my daughter's eulogy of Barbara was, no offense, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon from a rabbi that was as powerful and as poignant as what she put together in 18 hours, in a tribute to her mother and my son as well. It's, what can I say? It's a void. That was the feeling I had then, the feeling I have now. John Wooden, going back to John Wooden, he used to write letters to his wife after she died and put it in an envelope and put it on her pillow on her side of the bed. And I thought that was so silly. Why would anybody take the time to do that? After Barbara died, I didn't write letters, but I found myself talking to her side of the bed, telling her about the grandkids, telling her about her kids. One of the sad things was that my son was appointed by Jerry Brown to the bench to be a judge. On December 31st, he found out about it. We were sitting Shiva, and my son shows me his iPhone, and it's an email from the governor's office saying, call ASAP. And I said, well, did you call? And he says, yeah. I said, what did they say? He said, I'm sworn to secrecy. I can't talk about it. I said, well, if the answer was no, they wouldn't have even called you. So you're going to be a judge. Don't tell anybody. I said, secret is good with me. Of course, the first thing I did was tell my sister. And she wasn't sworn to secrecy. The sadness of him getting that news, something he has wanted since he was in high school. He loves the law and he loves being a judge, and he's great at it. I mean, this kid he's not a kid. He's incredible legal mind and practical legal problem solver. And the notion that, and Barbara knew he had applied, that she never got to know this, it really impacted him. And my history degree was British Empire history, so I draw on British Empire history a lot. I told my son, I said, well, now you know how Prince Charles is going to feel when his mother dies. Should he mourn the passing of the mother he doesn't really care for, or should he or should he celebrate his ascension to the throne? And of course, then it happened to Prince Charles too. It was a sad. It was aside from everything else, it was sad. Look, the one thing I regret more than anything else is, I'll be very honest about it, is I think I did appreciate her a lot. I wish I had appreciated her even more than I did in her life than I did in her post life, because when you looked at the crowd in that funeral, it was a snapshot of who she was. In that sanctuary were Eli and Edie Brode on the one hand, and the woman who cleaned our house on the other, who took a bus to get there, and then took a bus to get to Mount Sinai Cemetery to be at the burial. My gardener, who wasn't at the funeral, but when I told him the news, he was a big guy, broke down in tears. And so it went. It was just the people whom she touched, were touched in such a profound way that I used the metaphor that she was like a computer, that you just add more capacity to it. I didn't understand how she could have such a wide circle of friends, and not just friends, but meaningful friends. She was the kind of person who, when you talked to her, you thought you were the only person in the world that she cared about. And by the way, she didn't forget anything. She had a trap for a mind. Don't ever tell her something you don't want her to remember, because she remembered everything. And when we went to a banquet, she would say, by the way, you see that woman over there? She's sleeping with that guy over there. I said, how do you know this? She says, oh, I know. She was wonderful, and thanks for asking.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take a couple of questions, and then I know you got to get home for Shabbos lunch. Okay, go ahead.
I came to the country.
That's okay. You came 40 years ago and you registered your kid?
At Temple Emmanuel, and the first person I met to welcome us, it was the third day that I was in the country, was Barbara, who was very active at Temple Emmanuel at that time. And then she said, oh, you speak English and you are Latin and you are Jewish. You have to come and work for my husband. And I said, I just arrived in the country. I need to see where my kids are going to go, what they are going to do. And then I got a good job, and I never went to work for you. But I always remember that was the first thing she told me.
Thanks for that story.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sir, with your vast and deep experience in the politics and being a professor, how do you see the future of anti-Semitism?
The future of anti-Semitism.
Particularly in the colleges.
Yeah.
Especially in the colleges.
Yeah, well, you know something about that, and so do I. I've been to Germany twice. The first time was on a trip with the American Jewish Committee in 1980. And it was a Jewish-German, thing. And we were speaking through an interpreter to a group of Germans. And I asked the question of my German compatriots there, or collaborators, whatever the word is, do you think the Holocaust could ever happen again in Germany? And, I don't think I asked the question, I think I made an assertion that, it could happen again in Germany. If it happened once, it happened again. Don't remember the details, but when it was over, one of the interpreters, who was a 22, 23-year-old woman, came up to me. She says, you really think we could do it again? She was offended by what I had said. She had interpreted. You never think about the interpreter when you're speaking. And I said, yeah, but I also think it could happen anywhere. If it could happen in Germany, it could happen in the United States. It could happen anywhere. It's just if the elements of what allows for this sort of thing to take place are in play here, a big economic recession, the whole constellation of things that lined up to create a Hitler. And yeah, it could happen anywhere. Now, do I think? Yeah, I mean, the politically correct thing to say is, of course, it would never happen here, but theoretically it could. I don't think theoretically anymore, and I don't go to sleep at night worried that there's going to be a knock on the door from ICE or from the FBI or from whoever. But there are a lot of people in this county, who go to bed at night worried about that, who are not citizens and who are citizens. And I'll tell you a couple of stories. I've been spending a lot of time at the dentist's office this last year, and the dental assistant for my dentist is a Latina whose father is undocumented. And he's been here for 30 years. He holds 2 jobs. And when the ICE thing started to happen here, he became very concerned because you're required, if you're not documented, to report to the ICE people once a year, or whatever it is, to just say, I'm here, I got a job. He was afraid to go to report because he thought he'd just be taken and incarcerated, which happened to somebody I know. And so but if he didn't go to report, that would be a cause for him to be arrested because he didn't report. So he just stays home, doesn't go out. There was a woman, a Muslim woman, I know her husband, American-born Muslim, who looks like a Latina because of the brown skin, and she said to me that she doesn't leave her house without her passport, without her American passport, because otherwise, how do you prove you're a citizen? Think about that. If a federal agent came in here today and demanded that you prove you're a citizen, you probably couldn't do it unless you have a passport. Your driver's license isn't enough. Your social security card isn't enough. You have to go get your birth certificate. It's impossible. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in this county, and I know because we surveyed them, and we're surveying them again this spring, who are deathly afraid of this kind of thing happening. Now, what does that have to do with anti-Semitism? There is anti-Semitism. It's been lurking under the surface for a long time. It never leaves. It's like that old Eagles song, you can come to California, Hotel California, but you can never leave. Anti-Semitism can never leave. There's always a boogeyman. You always need a scapegoat for something, and the Jews have always provided the scapegoat. That's why Israel is such an important part of the Jewish people. That's why I believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I don't think that should even be debatable now. I mean, they went, the West Bloomfield, Michigan thing 2 days ago, they didn't pick on the Israeli consulate in Detroit. They picked on a synagogue. Nobody makes a distinction between the Star of David on the Israeli flag and the Star of David on Sinai Temple. So there is an anti-Semitism problem. I've been at UCLA now for 11 years as an academic, and it's horrible. And it's not unique to UCLA. It's just that UCLA, like everything else, when it happens at UCLA, it's big news. If it happens at Bowdoin College, nobody cares. I've had professors come to me who tenured professors who want to leave the university because they signed a letter supporting Israel, condemning the Hamas attack in October 7th, and they were blackballed. They were canceled by the rest of the people in their department, and meetings were held they weren't invited to, The UCLA Medical School, I won't go into any detail about it. It's a major problem. There's a concern at UCLA that the law school, the number of Jewish professors at the law school is diminishing, not being replenished. That predictions are that in the five or 6 years there won't be a single Jewish professor at the law school. I mean, these things aren't an accident. And now, I will tell you that at UCLA, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on UCLA, but our new chancellor, Julio Frank, is a godsend. I mean, he's the right man for this time. And he's very comfortable in his skin. He doesn't look over his shoulder. But generally, beyond the universities, and Julio Frank will tell you this, that it starts at the universities and then it spreads. And I'm concerned about it, and I don't know what to do about it. I'm taking the Rabbi's advice here. I don't know the answer to this. I do know what the problem is. I will tell you, I've been asked this not often, but once in a while, did you ever experience anti-Semitism as a public official? And in my working environment, never. Now, what they said behind my back, I don't know, but I doubt I knew them well enough to know. Because you can only demonize people who you don't know. If you know somebody, it's hard to demonize them, especially if you think they're good folks and you work with them every day. That's why it's so interesting to see the diversity of LA. You now have a situation, I don't want to keep anybody from lunch here, but I'm going to tell you a very quick story. In one of the first surveys I did when I came to UCLA, we asked people, this is right after Trump got elected the first time and he was going to deport undocumented persons. And we asked the question, are you worried, would you support deportation of undocumented persons, something along those lines, and yes or no? And overwhelmingly people said, no, we wouldn't support it. We don't think they should be deported. That was the way we asked the question. And then we looked at the demographics of how people answered, and white people did not think it was right to deport people who were here, who were undocumented. And so we interviewed a couple of the people who said white people who said that they weren't supportive of deportation of undocumented persons. Because why do you think that? One woman was a 60-year-old plus woman in Manhattan Beach. And Jim Newton, who was an LA Times reporter for many years, is now at UCLA. I asked him to interview them. And so he interviews her. Why don't you think they should be deported? Oh, because, their kids are in our school. They're active in our PTA. It would be a shame to see them deported. And I said to Jim, 25 years ago, a white woman in her 60s in Manhattan Beach would say, put them on the first bus and send them to Tijuana. So something has changed. I mean, I don't make that judgment based on one thing. The other guy we talked to was a guy in his late 20s in the San Gabriel Valley. And the reason he was not for deportation is because his girlfriend, his fiancée, was a Latina. And his fiancee's mother was undocumented. And he was concerned that if the mother got deported, the fiancée would go back with her, and there goes his life. To me, that was just an interesting window on how this diversity has kind of, the integration, there's a lot of segregation, but there's also a lot of integration at the workplace, and people so there's some positive things here. The problem I see for us, and then I'll stop, is the old story that we've had for thousands of years. We're being attacked on the left, and we're being attacked from the right. We have no safe harbor. And politically, as a politician, it's tough. I mean, look what's happening in New York. You have you have no home, you have nowhere to turn. And I think part of it is the anti-Semitism, and I think part of it, to be honest with you, is that we as a community have not made enough of an effort to build relationships with other communities. Now, I think we're in for a rough ride, and the current situation, I don't want to get into the Iran situation per se, but I think Marco Rubio's comment last week was terrible. It was the worst thing, I mean, that we could have heard from him. That the reason we went into Iran is because the Israelis were going to do it first, and we were going to get dragged into it anyway. Basically, is what he said. And I'll say I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but the one thing he said that I agreed with is, well, it wasn't really that. It's, you know, we pressured them; they didn't pressure us. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was a good thing to say. But people believe that. Enough people believe that. The whole conspiracy theory we've been victimized by. So I'm worried about it.
The way to fight back, it sounds like you're saying, is to build alliances.
To build alliances with others, and education. I mean, you know, we have forgotten. As a society, we have forgotten why there isn't Israel to begin with. There's Holocaust education in our public schools is non-existent. Right. So all of it's a bigger picture than just this. But we have ceded the territory to people who are not our friends. And one of the, I'll leave it at that. We need to be not defensive about who we are. I mean, I'm not defensive about being called by saying I'm a Zionist. I am a Zionist. I do. What is Zionism? It is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. And if there's any reason, if there's any need for an explanation of why the Jewish people need their own homeland, is what we're experiencing right now, even in the diaspora. And that's where Zionism in Europe, that's how it emerged. It emerged because everybody had their own nation except for us. And for 2,000 years we've been in the diaspora, and in every country we were, you know, in fact, you know this better than I do, but my father was a Jewish history teacher, and I do remember the committee of the Vad Arba Haratzot. Right. In one of the towns that was important to that Vad was a town called Yaroslav in Poland. There was a kind of a Jewish government within Europe to deal with, you know, like imagine the Jewish Federation have a kind of a city council within the city, and for the Jewish community. We have a rough ride ahead, and it's not going in the right direction. Our response needs to be, you know, not defensive, and let's remind people why we're here, why Israel is there. Israel is not perfect. Their prosecution of the war in Gaza was not perfect. People have strong feelings about that. But, you know, I'll close with this. Do you know that the Los Angeles Times, the paper, so-called paper of record in Los Angeles, never wrote an editorial condemning the Hamas incursion into Israel? Not a peep. Not in 2.5 years have they ever now they don't even have editorials. They did not. New York Times did. The Washington Post did. Even people who are critical of Israel, they had to say that the incursion of Hamas and the rape and pillage of 1,200 people was wrong. Not here in the Los Angeles Times. We have a lot of work to do here in our own backyard, and we should do it. Okay.
Well, I want to thank our wonderful guest on this Shabbat, Zev Yaroslavsky, for everything he taught us and for everything he's done. And thank you all, and Shabbat Shalom. It's a great pleasure. Really, you are terrific.